That morning did not feel important at first. Just another quiet day that looked like every other day. But sometimes the smallest moments carry the heaviest truths. I printed the statement early in the morning, and before the pages even finished sliding out, I already felt something inside me tighten. Not panic, not confusion, recognition. The kind that comes from a lifetime of seeing things exactly as they are. I had spent decades sitting across from people, watching them misunderstand their own lives through the numbers written right in front of them. Now I was sitting alone at my own desk, and for the first time in a long time, those numbers were mine. The room was quiet in that steady grey way only a winter morning can be. My coffee sat beside me, slowly losing heat, and I reached for the same yellow highlighter I had trusted for years without thinking twice. Routine has a way of making you feel safe, until it doesn't. The first pages looked normal enough. Bills I recognized, expenses I remembered, nothing out of place. That's how it always starts. You don't notice the problem immediately. You ease into it slowly, like stepping into cold water without realizing how deep it actually goes. Then I turned the page. There it was. A charge from a place I had never visited. I stared at it longer than necessary, not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I understood it too quickly. I checked the date. I hadn't been there, not recently, not even close. I marked it anyway. Then came another charge, different place, same city, and then another, each one pulling the thread a little tighter. I didn't rush. That's something people misunderstand. When something is wrong, you don't move faster, you move slower, careful, deliberate, exact, because the truth is already there. You just have to let it show itself. By the time I reached the next page, I already knew this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't repeat themselves like that. Patterns do. And this was a pattern. A clear one, a steady one, the kind you can't explain away no matter how badly you might want to. Then I saw it. A payment that didn't belong to me. Not something small, not something forgettable, something intentional, something that had been happening again and again without interruption. That was the moment everything settled. Not exploded, settled. Because clarity doesn't come with noise, it comes quietly. It sits in front of you, waiting for you to accept it. I didn't call anyone. Not yet. I finished going through every single page, every charge, every detail, marked carefully, counted twice, because accuracy matters more than emotion when the truth finally shows up. By the time I was done, the pages were filled with yellow marks, each one telling the same story from a slightly different angle. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision, made more than once, repeated, sustained. And somewhere deep inside, I already knew who had made it. That was the part that didn't surprise me. Not really. What surprised me was how calm I felt. Not empty, not cold, just clear. There's a difference between being shocked and finally understanding something you've been avoiding for years. And I wasn't shocked. I was done avoiding. I gathered the pages together, aligned them carefully, and clipped them the way I always had when something needed attention. Then I wrote the date on the folder. Simple, clean, final. That's when I reached for the phone, not with hesitation, not with anger, but with the steady certainty of someone who had spent a lifetime telling others exactly what to do when the numbers stopped making sense. Now it was my turn to follow that advice, and I wasn't going to look away. If you've ever felt that quiet moment when something inside you shifts permanently, then you already understand what came next. Because the truth is, the hardest part isn't discovering the problem. It's deciding what you're going to do after you understand it completely. I sat there for a while after the call, not moving, not thinking in circles, just letting everything settle exactly where it belonged. Outside, the morning stayed the same, grey, still, unbothered by anything happening inside my house. That's one thing life does very well. It keeps moving like nothing has changed, even when everything inside you already has. I had built a routine after retirement, something quiet, something steady, something mine. Slow mornings, hot coffee, no rush. A life that finally felt like it belonged to me. And now, sitting at that desk, I realized something I hadn't admitted before. That peace had been sitting on top of something unresolved, something I had chosen not to look at too closely. Because sometimes, when you love someone, you adjust your reality to keep things easier. Not better, just easier. I stood up eventually and walked through the house slowly, as if I needed to remind myself that everything else was still in place. The kitchen looked the same. The cabinets I refinished years ago still held that soft white colour I had worked so carefully to get right. The table sat exactly where it always had. Everything was familiar. Everything was mine, and yet something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. I picked up my phone again, not to call her, but to call someone who understood silence. Harriet answered on the second ring. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She never does. There are people who react loudly when they hear something unexpected. And then there are people like Harriet who understand that the first thing you need is not noise, but steadiness. I told her what I had found, not dramatically, just the facts, clear, ordered, complete. There was a pause on the line, not shock, something closer to recognition, like she had been waiting for this moment to arrive without knowing exactly when it would. She asked me one simple question: how long? That was it. No judgment, no surprise, just the number behind the story. I told her, and again there was silence, but this time it carried weight. Because once a pattern has a length, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes deliberate. She asked if I had already contacted the bank. I told her I had. She said she could come with me if I wanted. I told her I would go alone. Not because I didn't need support, but because I needed clarity first. Support comes after. Clarity comes before. We agreed I would call her later, that she would be there, but only when I was ready for that part. That's what real support looks like. Not stepping in too early, not taking over, just standing close enough that you don't have to face things completely alone. After the call, I sat back down at the desk. The folder was still there, exactly where I had left it. Nothing about it had changed, but everything about what it meant had. I opened it again, not because I needed to check anything, but because I needed to see it one more time without emotion interfering. This time, I wasn't looking for mistakes. I was looking for truth. And truth has a pattern. It repeats, it connects, it builds a story whether you want it to or not. I started at the beginning again. Each charge told a small part of something bigger. A dinner here, a purchase there, something that could be explained on its own. But together they formed something undeniable. That's how these things work. Individually, they feel harmless, but patterns don't lie. Patterns reveal intention, and intention is where everything changes. As I traced through the timeline, I realized something that settled deeper than any of the numbers themselves. This hadn't started suddenly. It had grown, quietly, gradually, over time. And the reason it had grown was because I had allowed it to. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but consistently. That realization didn't come with anger, it came with responsibility, because the truth isn't always about what someone else did. Sometimes it's about what you made possible. I had always been the one who made things easier, the one who stepped in, the one who solved problems before they became visible. At the time, it felt like love, and maybe it was, but love without boundaries doesn't stay love forever. Eventually, it becomes expectation, and expectation left unchecked turns into entitlement. That's what the pattern I was seeing now, not just in the charges, but in everything that came before them. Every time I said yes when I should have paused, every time I avoided a difficult conversation because it felt easier in the moment, every time I chose peace over truth, all of it had led here. And sitting there with those pages in front of me, I understood something clearly for the first time in a long time. This wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about accountability, about reality, about finally deciding that avoiding discomfort was costing more than facing it ever would. I closed the folder again, this time with intention, not hesitation, and I placed it exactly where it belonged, right in front of me, because I wasn't going to move it aside. I wasn't going to pretend this was something that could wait. Some things don't get better with time, they just get more expensive, and I had already paid enough. By the time I left for the bank, the decision had already been made. Not in that moment, but over years of small choices that had finally reached their limit. The drive there felt familiar. Same roads, same turns, same buildings passing by. But everything looked slightly different, not because the world had changed, but because I had stopped looking at it the way I used to. And once you see something clearly, you can't go back to not seeing it. That's the part no one tells you. Clarity is permanent, and I was never more clear about anything in my life. Before I even stepped inside the bank, I already knew how the conversation would go. Not the exact words, not the tone, but the structure of it, because I had been on the other side of that same desk for most of my life. I had watched people walk in carrying folders, holding on to explanations, hoping something could still be undone. And now, for the first time, I was the one walking in with the truth already settled in my hands. The building looked exactly the same brick walls, same glass doors, same quiet hum inside. Nothing about it had changed, but the feeling was different. Because this time I wasn't the one walking in as the person who helps solve the problem. I was the one who had to face it. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The smell of the place hit me immediately, that familiar mix of paper, polished floors, and quiet routine. For a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed, like I could walk back behind the counter and everything would return to normal. But life doesn't work like that. You don't get to return to a version of yourself once you've outgrown it. Denise was waiting for me. She recognized me instantly. Not just my face, but my voice, my posture, the way I carried that folder. There's a certain way people walk when they already know the truth. She saw it, and I saw that she saw it. We didn't waste time with small talk. There are moments in life where politeness becomes unnecessary. This was one of them. We sat down across from each other, just like I had done with hundreds of people before. Only this time, I wasn't the one asking questions. She was. She asked if I had the charges listed. I handed her the papers, neatly organized, clearly marked, nothing missing. Old habits don't disappear. They become part of how you handle everything. She looked through the pages carefully, and I watched her the same way I used to watch my own employees, not judging, just observing. There's a rhythm to this kind of work, the way someone reads, the way they pause, the way they process information. I could tell she understood immediately what she was looking at. This wasn't confusion. This was a pattern, a clean, undeniable pattern. She asked if I recognized the charges. I told her which ones I did and which ones I didn't. No hesitation, no guessing, just facts. That's all this required now, facts. Because once something reaches this point, feelings don't change the outcome, only clarity does. Then she asked the question that most people struggle with, the one that usually brings hesitation. Do you want to move forward with this? I didn't take time to think about it, not because it wasn't serious, but because the decision had already been made long before I walked into that room. I said yes, simple, direct, final. She nodded, not surprised, just confirming what she already knew from the way I had walked in. The paperwork began. Forms, signatures, documentation, all the things I had guided others through for years. Now I was the one signing. It felt strange for a moment, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar in a very specific way, like hearing your own voice from the outside. I answered every question the same way I always had at work, clear, complete, without adding anything unnecessary. There's a discipline to truth when you've practiced it long enough. You don't decorate it, you don't soften it, you present it exactly as it is, and you let it stand on its own. That's what I did. She explained the process, what would happen next, how long it would take, what steps would follow. I listened carefully, not because I didn't know, but because this time it applied directly to me. There's a difference between knowing something and experiencing it, and that difference matters. When everything was finished, she looked at me for a moment before closing the folder, not with pity, not with judgment, just with understanding, because she knew what kind of decision this was, not just professionally, personally, deeply, the kind that changes relationships, the kind that doesn't reverse. I stood up, thanked her, and walked out the same way I came in, calm, steady, certain. Outside, the air felt colder, or maybe I just noticed it more. I walked to my car and sat there for a moment without starting the engine, not because I was unsure, but because I understood what had just been set in motion. Once you take a step like that, there's no going back to before, and I wasn't trying to. That's the difference. I drove home the same way I always did, same roads, same turns, same quiet neighborhoods. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, but inside something had settled into place, not relief, not yet, something closer to alignment, like everything that had been slightly off for a long time had finally clicked into position. When I got home, the house felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had changed the terms of how I was living in it. I set the folder down on the desk again, carefully, respectfully, because it represented something important now, not just a problem, a boundary, a line that had finally been drawn after years of quietly stepping back from it. I didn't call her that day, not after the bank, not that evening either. Some conversations don't need to happen immediately. Some truths don't require discussion to be real. I made dinner, simple, familiar, the kind of meal you make when you need stability more than anything else. I ate at the table like I always did, no distractions, no noise, just quiet, and for the first time in a long time, that quiet felt honest, not comfortable, not easy, but honest, and there's a difference. That night I slept without interruption, not because nothing had happened, but because everything had been acknowledged. There's a kind of peace that only comes from facing something fully, even when it costs you, even when it changes everything. And as I lay there in the dark, I realized something that stayed with me long after that day was over. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of the situation, not of the outcome, not even of what it meant for the relationship I had been holding on to for so long. Because once you choose truth, fear loses its place, and what's left is something much quieter, something steadier, something real. There's a moment after everything is set in motion when the outside world goes quiet again, but inside you something keeps unfolding slowly. That's where I found myself in the days after. Not in chaos, not in regret, but in reflection. The kind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. It just shows you things you've been avoiding for years. I sat at the desk again a few days later, the same place where it had all started, and opened the folder one more time. Not because I needed proof anymore. That part was already settled. I opened it because I wanted to understand how far back this really went. Not just the charges, the pattern. Because nothing like this begins suddenly. It builds, quietly, gradually, one small moment at a time, until it becomes something undeniable. I started thinking about her, not the situation. Her, as a child, as a teenager, as the young woman who had once stood in this same house with plans and possibilities that felt wide open. And I asked myself a question I hadn't asked honestly before. When did I stop seeing clearly? Not when she changed, when I did. Because it's easier to believe that someone else shifted than to admit you slowly adjusted your own boundaries until they disappeared. I remembered the first time she came to me needing help. It didn't feel like a warning then. It felt like what a mother does. You step in, you support, you fix what you can, and you tell yourself it's temporary, just this once. But just this once has a way of repeating itself when you never redefine it. Each time felt reasonable, each time had a reason. Each time came with a story that made saying yes feel easier than asking difficult questions. And over time, those moments stopped feeling like exceptions. They became normal. That's how patterns form, not through one big decision, but through a series of smaller ones that never get examined closely enough. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room slowly. This space had always been about order. Everything had its place, every file, every document, every detail accounted for, except this part of my life. This part had been running without structure, without limits, without clarity. And now I was seeing it all at once. Not just what she had done, but what I had allowed. That realization didn't break me, it steadied me, because once you understand your role in something that went wrong, you also understand your power to change what happens next. Later that week, I sat down with Harriet at her kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many ordinary conversations over the years. This time, nothing about it felt ordinary. She had made something warm, something familiar, the kind of meal that fills the room before you even sit down. We talked about everything else first. That's how people like us do it. We don't rush into the heavy things. We let the silence settle naturally until it's ready to be filled. Then she looked at me and said quietly, "Tell me everything. Not part of it, not the version that's easier to say. Everything." So I did, from the first charge to the last realization, from the numbers to the pattern behind them. She didn't interrupt, not once. She listened the way very few people can, fully present, without trying to fix it, without trying to soften it, just letting it be what it was. When I finished, she sat there for a moment before speaking. Then she said something that stayed with me. This didn't start with the charges. I nodded, because I already knew that. She continued, "It started the first time you chose not to draw a line." There it was, simple, accurate, undeniable. Not blame, just truth. And truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. We sat there quietly after that, not uncomfortable, just aware. Because once something is named clearly, it changes the way you carry it. Later that evening, my phone lit up with her name. I didn't answer immediately, not out of anger, not out of avoidance, but because I needed to be certain that when I did answer, I would speak from clarity and not from habit. She called again later. This time I answered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then her voice, familiar, but different. There was fear in it, and something else, confusion, the kind that comes when reality doesn't match what you expected it to be. She started explaining, trying to frame it, trying to reshape it into something that could still be managed with words. I listened, fully, without interrupting, because sometimes people reveal more in what they say when you don't stop them. When she finished, there was silence again. Then she asked me why I hadn't come to her first, why I hadn't given her a chance to fix it. That question hung there for a moment, and I realized very clearly. She believed this was something that could be fixed with a conversation. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It came from history, from every time I had stepped in before, from every time I had made things easier. So I answered her calmly, not with anger, not with emotion, just with truth. This wasn't something to fix afterwards. Silence, heavy this time, because that was the first moment she was hearing something different, something that didn't bend, something that didn't adjust to make things easier, something final. The conversation didn't last long. It didn't need to, because everything that mattered had already been said in the actions that came before it. After the call ended, I sat there for a while looking at nothing in particular, not replaying the conversation, not questioning anything, just feeling the weight of what had finally changed. This wasn't about distance. It wasn't about punishment. It was about truth finally taking its place where avoidance used to live. And that shift, as quiet as it was the most permanent one of all. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already understand something most people avoid. Truth is not loud. It doesn't force itself into your life. It waits, patiently, until you are ready to see it clearly and accept what it asks from you. By the time everything reached its final stage, there wasn't much left to decide. That part had already been done in the quiet moments no one else saw. What remained was simply the process unfolding the way it always does when something handled correctly. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into something steadier, not easier, but clearer. Clarity has a rhythm to it. It doesn't rush. It doesn't overwhelm. It settles in slowly until it becomes the way you see everything. I returned to my routine, not because nothing had changed, but because everything had. And routine, when it's built honestly, doesn't hide from reality. It supports it. Mornings became quiet again, coffee at the same desk, the same light coming through the window, the same steady feeling of knowing exactly where I stood. That was new, not the routine, the certainty, because for a long time there had been a part of my life that didn't follow the same rules as everything else, a part that existed without structure, without accountability, without clear boundaries. And now that part had finally been brought into the same order as everything else I had ever managed. There's a kind of peace in that that's difficult to explain. Not happiness, not relief, something deeper, something more stable, like standing on solid ground after realizing how long you had been balancing without noticing it. The resolution came quietly, not with drama, not with confrontation, just with completion. Everything documented, everything processed, everything placed exactly where it belonged. I remember sitting at the desk one morning, reviewing my statement again, page by page, the same way I always had, the same yellow highlighter in my hand. But this time, there was nothing unfamiliar, nothing that didn't belong to me. Every line was clear, every charge made sense, every number told the same simple story. This is yours. No confusion, no overlap, no hidden weight, just accuracy. And accuracy, when you've lived without it in certain areas, feels like freedom. Not dramatic freedom, not the kind people talk about loudly. Quiet freedom, the kind that lets you sit in your own space without questioning what's underneath it. I didn't rush to celebrate anything. That wouldn't have been honest. Instead, I acknowledged it, the way you acknowledge something that has been completed correctly, with respect, with understanding, with acceptance of what it cost to get there. Because there is always a cost, even when the decision is right, even when the outcome is necessary. There are things you don't get back. Moments, versions of people, versions of yourself. And learning to live without those is part of what makes the truth real. I stepped outside that afternoon and stood in the yard for a while. The air felt different, or maybe I just noticed it more. The tree in the corner stood exactly as it always had, steady, unmoving, uncomplicated. It didn't adjust itself to make anything easier. It simply existed as it was meant to do. That's when it settled fully for me, the difference between love and what I had been doing before. Love doesn't require you to erase your own boundaries. It doesn't ask you to ignore reality to keep someone else comfortable. Love can exist at the same time as truth, even when that truth changes everything. I still loved her. That never disappeared. What changed was what that love looked like. It was no longer something that absorbed everything without question. It was something defined, something grounded, something real. And real things don't collapse under pressure. They hold their shape. Time continued forward, as it always does, without asking whether you feel ready or not, and I moved with it, not dragging the past behind me, not trying to rewrite it, just carrying the understanding that came from finally facing it. There was a moment, simple and almost unnoticeable, that told me everything had changed. I opened my statement again one morning, looked at the final balance, and felt nothing but recognition. No tension, no doubt, just certainty. This is mine, fully, completely, without anyone else's claim on it. That moment didn't last long. It didn't need to, because once you reach that level of clarity, you don't need to keep proving it to yourself. You just live from it. Later that day, I went back into the kitchen and found the old card still sitting where I had left it. It had already been replaced. It had already served its purpose, but it was still there, a reminder of something that had been closed but not yet finished. I picked up a pair of scissors and cut it slowly, not with anger, not with emotion, just with intention. One piece, then another, until it no longer held any function, no connection, no use, just fragments of something that had already been accounted for. I dropped the pieces away and stood there for a second, not expecting to feel anything. And I didn't, because closure doesn't always come with a strong emotion. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of something simple finally being done. I went back to my coffee, sat down at the table, and continued with my day. That's how you know something is finished, when it no longer interrupts your life, when it becomes part of your past without demanding your attention in the present. The world outside continued, as it always does. Neighbors passing by, trees shifting with the wind, ordinary life moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully aligned with it, not ahead of it, not behind it, just present within it. If there's anything to take from this, it's not about the situation itself. It's about what happens when you stop looking away, when you decide that clarity matters more than comfort, when you accept that some truths will cost you but will still be worth it. Because in the end, what you gain is something no one else can give you: ownership of your life, of your choices, of your reality. And once you have that, fully, completely, honestly, there's nothing left to question, only something left to live.